So democracy, as we all know, is heavily faltered. Democracy in the modern day has very, very many issues. We have political families who control the spotlight and who are continuously elected as leaders, such as the Bushes and the Clintons in America. We also have issues of sponsorship that affect who is put in charge, because parties sell themselves out for political funding, and this results in corruption and division of the nation. For example, on the Sydney Opera House, the Liberal Party allowed for the projection of gambling ads for racing onto the Sydney Opera House. We've got many issues with democracy that start from this and then continue throughout the system, including vote by popularity instead of by wisdom and intelligence. We have things such as many voters having their whole collective desire stymied by simple political choice issues and faulty promises that continue pervasively throughout the entire system. Now we must ask ourselves what alternatives are there, because we often hear of what alternatives there are to democracy from the communists, the socialists, the fascists, the neo-Nazis, and so on and so forth. Who and what do we put in charge? What do we do instead of democracy if it is so faltered? As we can see by pure kingdoms in history, as we can see by many of the other republics in history, as we can see by many of the other systems in history, there is not one individual perfect system that we can easily see. Many systems out there are very, very faltered. Kingdoms, upon having a corrupt ruler, will often have the whole country go towards terror. However, their advantage is, upon having a good ruler, the country will do very, very well. Dictatorships have much the same issue, and to get in charge, the dictator is often a cause of much instability, and will often cause the country to do very, very badly if he does not take rule and manage rule properly. Succession in dictatorships is very, very weak. However, if a good dictator is able to get in charge, he is able to do good for the country. There are many examples of this, of good dictators and bad dictators throughout history. We also have oligarchies as another example, which we do not see much of currently, and we have not heard much of. However, these were present in places like Venice, the Republic of Venice, back in history, and several other countries that, though very, very rich, may not be considered suitable permanently for every country across the world, for they had their own systemic issues of rule by the rich, which for Venice was okay because that was its intention, its purpose, to simply trade. However, for countries such as Australia, China, Russia, America, these countries are not necessarily aimed towards getting rich, because they are not small individual city-states. They are larger and they have a different purpose, a different goal, a different existence in mind. The systems that I favour throughout history, though, are these benign oligarchies, these benign kingdoms, these benign dictatorships and benign democracies that have existed. And the systems that have existed before have often put the good in charge, which has caused the nation to do well. Democracy by itself is not individually the best. However, under the founding fathers who created in America, it did very well. Or under the Athenian democracy, it did very, very well. We see dictatorship has often been very, very terrible. However, under certain dictators, such as those in Sicily during the Greek rule of Sicily, they did have some good dictators there to do the country well. We do see lots of good oligarchies as well, such as the Venetian oligarchy that was mentioned, that did very, very well. So we must then ask ourselves, what do we actually want? And which system of government will give us the best that we can possibly afford? Well, I would advocate, right now, the best system that provides the best results is a type of constitutional monarchy, close to Prussian monarchy, but not so far off from the current monarchies of Britain, Australia, Canada, those that are known in the Commonwealth, essentially. These monarchies that we live under have the possibility of intervention by the king and or queen, but they do not have the pure rule of the king or queen. A bad ruler will not affect the country because they do not tend to intervene very often. Now, I say Prussian monarchy closer than the British monarchy because the Prussian monarch did more frequently intervene, and though this did have issues, such as Kaiser Wilhelm deciding, as the Prussian monarch, to jump headlong into World War I, even though many called it a bad idea, we do see that by and large it was very, very, very successful. Because, in theory, what will happen is that if the system has corruptions, if the system has issues, then the monarch may step in and correct those issues. It will run normally as like it does in a current regular democracy. However, it is still very, very, very capable of being intervened in. As we see in Australia, what is currently happening is that many, many, many senators, many bureaucrats, many politicians are selling themselves out to companies, are selling themselves out to the Chinese for political favours. Since the monarch has no vested interest in gaining more money, he is simply very interested in making the country prosper. He has a vested interest in doing his nation well because his fate is tied to the fate of the nation. If he causes his nation to suffer, then there will be revolution and he will be ousted. If he causes his nation to do well, then he himself will be looked upon and will have a source of pride. This is not what will practically happen 100% of the time, however it is the core and the basis of which we will base our legal system around. For example, as a simple measure of how to force the king, force the politicians, force several people to be tied to the fate of the nation, if their salary is the annual wage of the Australian population, then they will be more inclined to make the Australian population richer. If their salary is tied to that, it will do them well. If they have to live in an average suburb with average Australians, then they will be forced to make themselves very, very acceptable to the public. Now, though this is not a direct ideal that we will follow along, these are policy implementations which can be practiced and then will cause a very, very good change in society, and in the sense that the king and the politicians will be enticed to making society do well. Now, why I advocate for this further instead of any other system is that other systems cannot have true overseers because the overseers will continually fight amongst themselves or have issues among themselves. For example, the Council of Ten in Venice ended up having lots of issues in the sense that it could end up seizing the power of the Republic. The two consuls in Rome, though they could also act as overseers, did so frequently intervene in government that they ended up having issues themselves over who was the primary consul, such as Caesar and his co-consul, whose name I have forgotten because it was unimportant, because he was ousted by Caesar and any good he could have done was basically nullified. There are lots and lots of issues, I understand, with the direct argument that I'm placing. I'm simply saying this off the top of my head at a park. However, this is what I will first post because it is good to say something out there. It's good to put the word out there and my advocacy for monarchy out there, because I truly do believe that currently a monarchy such as that we have in Australia, more oriented towards the king intervening on occasion, not always, ends up causing good. On the occurrence of a bad monarch, he can be nullified by the parliament. However, on the occurrence of an average or good parliament, the monarch does not need to intervene. On the occurrence of an average or good king, and the king does intervene, the monarch does not need to be repressed. Parliament does not need to step in to prevent the monarch's powers from going over their reach. I advocate this because it takes the Enlightenment one step further, and we have truly enlightened despots as were brought forth by the ancient Greeks, and who were praised as ideal also by several Enlightenment thinkers.